The Island of Dr. Moreau by Herbert George Wells when I was a child. It was one of my father's books. I was told it was much too scary for me to read, and that immediately kind of put the hook in me. And obviously I tried to get my hands on the copy and read it as fast as possible. Wells's original novel is a vast and complicated and terrifying book. It's still one of the greatest sci-fi novels of all time, and has never, in my mind, really been properly adapted to screen. I mean, it's a story which deals with not only what mankind is doing to nature and the way that we try and reshape it into the image of our own dreams and desires, but it deals with the cruelty of mankind, the cruelty of nature, and ultimately what makes mankind into mankind to begin with. Because strangely enough, this notion of what is human is a very plastic concept. It's very fragile. We define humanity pretty much on the level of what's human is what can tell us more or less in our own language in English to stop killing us. If you can say, get your hands off me, you dirty ape, or don't kill me, it makes you human. If you can't do those things, essentially you're not human and thus can be killed, dissected, and treated like furniture. But yeah, Moreau deals with those themes. That little problem of humanity is a very, very, very plastic concept. At the time, this is a pretty revolutionary idea because Wells is writing in the middle of the Victorian period and the great age of colonialism, and everyone liked to believe that what they were doing was the greatest thing ever. But I think Wells consistently could see that humans weren't that much different from microbes, and that whatever civilization we had was paper thin. With Dr. Moreau, he went after, there was the idea of evolution, which was creeping around, which was upsetting people. But even more upsetting is the idea of devolution, that we might turn back into animals again or lose the civilization we have. That man at the moment is just one split second, an isolated moment in evolution. Behind us and before, ahead of us are countless millions of years in which we're going to change into things which are not quite the same as we are now, which might not fit our current definition of strictly what human is. Wells was also, I think, appalled by vivisection and a lot of the experimentation that was going on in animals at the time. In the book, Moreau is a vivisectionist and is literally torturing these creatures into human form. Is in love with the infinite plasticity of the form, and he has a humanizing process and is trying to turn them into men. But even Wells acknowledged this wouldn't work. In the afterword to Moreau, he mentions that there is something inherent in the human cell, deep inside the cell, which identifies its species, and he didn't know what it was because the concept of DNA didn't get basically identified or invented until the 1950s. But hanging within Moreau is the specter of genetic engineering and biomechanics and all the stuff which was going to come and which I think is going to still influence our immediate future in a big way. If the imbalances were found in the laboratory, to quote Dr. Moreau, maybe the correctives can be found there too. That maybe there is a way through DNA and everything else to actually fix the things that have gone wrong. And certainly we're heading a lot further down the line now towards being able to grow surrogate organs, grow extra limbs, etc. And I can see that the good doctor's work may come into, may bear fruit. Wells was still alive to see Island of Lost Souls, and I believe absolutely hated it. He felt it was a gross simplification of his work. In point of fact, Island of Lost Souls is probably the best adaptation of Island of Dr. Moreau. It's highly atmospheric and has an atmosphere of oppression and pain about it, which is still very powerful. I'm very glad Wells wasn't around to see the next two remakes, which were kind of a step downwards. When Wells sold the screen rights to Dr. Moreau and the Island of Lost Souls appeared, the film was very liberally adapted. As with all three of the existing official adaptations, major damage was done to the original story, and that essentially Moreau is kind of trivialized into a direct sadist, into a more of a monster. He's a much more ambiguous figure in the original story, whereas Charles Laughton's obviously a mustachio-twirling sadist. Each one of the three adaptations has kind of been, had its message hijacked a little, so that instead we're seeing a story about democracy, which is a sort of what happens in science fiction movies in America. Generally, there's always an oppressive, evil guy in charge. There's a slave race who's being oppressed by an evil empire or aliens, or in this case, Dr. Moreau. The beast men rise up and liberate themselves. Everything is okay at the end, which doesn't actually happen in the book. In the book, Moreau dies fairly early on, and things just get worse after Moreau's dead. Yeah, in Wells's book, one of the key elements is that Moreau is working on animals. Moreau is an ethical man. He's actually amazed at the castaway, Prentic's horror that when the castaway sees what Moreau's doing, he's absolutely appalled, which makes Moreau in the book immediately say, I take it you're an atheist then. But Moreau's a religious man. He has pretty solid values. He is working only with animals. The creatures in the book are animals which are tormented into a human form. They're never human. They were always beasts, and he has been able to raise them up through, in the book he's working with vivisection. It's a surgical process in the House of Pain in his laboratory. He's able to, for a while, bring them up to human status. He's able to even give them larynxes so they can talk. Unfortunately, there is something within them that compels them back to beast state. The beast flesh reasserts itself, and although he struggles, every time he's doomed to failure, the wild always reasserts itself. In a way, Moreau's a kind of the ultimate colonialist. He's someone who's attempting very hard to turn these poor animals into Englishmen. But he's also a version of God. He's also a version of nature. His is the hand that wounds. His is the hand that heals. He's something that, a figure whose scalpel can heal you and kill you at the same time. And when we hear the screams coming from Moreau's laboratory, we don't know whether those are screams of things dying or screams of things being born. The process is very close. The castaway is peering into the laboratory in the middle of the rainforest, is really looking into the core of creation, into where life itself is being created. It's something wonderful and horrible all at the same time. I think the story retains its power to horrify us because it questions our humanity and our basic fundamental precepts about what being human is, and also what fair play is in a way. I mean, the castaway initially is upset because Moreau is not, he thinks he's experimenting on humans, but actually it's okay because they're animals. He initially thinks Moreau's a monster and tries to do things better on the island, but rapidly realizes that actually Moreau's doing the right thing to begin with. And by the end of the book, the castaway is replicating Moreau's approach and is behaving in exactly the same way. His own grasp of morality is eroded and ultimately inverted and destroyed by what he encounters on the island. After I read Island of Dr. Moreau as a child, I rushed out to see the AOP adaptation with Burt Lancaster and Michael York at my local cinema. I think it was one of the first films I ever saw in my life, which made me so angry I wanted my money back. I was deeply disappointed by it, and I remember thinking at the time that I could make a better movie than that, which I think planted the idea in my head that I wanted to try and readapt Island of Dr. Moreau and do it justice. I got a shot at it many years later, and initially we created a script which I was extremely happy with. We updated it, mostly because I figured that Wells was working with the near future or the present in his day, and it wouldn't have made any sense to keep it in Victorian times, so I moved it to the near future. And I did change the lead character somewhat. I changed the castaway from being a gentleman of leisure, as in the book, to I made him into a civil rights lawyer in the screenplay, because I was interested to have someone who was inherently involved in human civil rights, who's then thrown into a situation of animals where the animals have no rights whatsoever, and to put him into a situation where he has to actually renegotiate the law being the strange sort of false religion code of values that Moreau has enforced upon the beast people in order to get them to behave. And yeah, the original draft of the Island of Dr. Moreau remake was going to be set immediately after a limited nuclear exchange. I also liked the idea that the people on the island might be the only thing that's left, or potentially all that remains of civilization, because it was looking forward to, I guess, a post-human future. Things got so bad on the island that in terms of the actual moral confusion and chaos that the guy goes through in the course of it, because the beast people love the masters. They don't want to rebel against them. They absolutely adore them. And Moreau's their creator. You know, he's very much an Old Testament creator god. And certainly in the book, and even in the AIP version, although not in Island of Lost Souls, is this notion that when Moreau dies, when the creator god dies and the beast people realize there is no god and everything starts to fall apart on the island, the castaway has the smart idea of translating the whole thing into a New Testament god and saying he is not dead, he is risen, and he watches over us from above. And of course, everything was wonderful for a while on the island. It was great being in charge of the beast people. We hired every dwarf we could find. We hired the shortest man on earth, Nelson de la Rosa, who played the original mini-me, the miniature version of Dr. Moreau. And we had two four-breasted ladies who we actually gave extra breasts to. There was a lot more animal sex, obviously, in the version that we were going for, all of which got dropped out. As day one of the production approached, it was clear that we were unable to actually shoot the movie, which pushed New Line into a position where all they could do was to close the whole movie down, freeze everything. They'd already had the makeup effects, they already had the sets, and they obviously they'd invested substantially, so they needed to try and recoup on that investment somehow. The entire production was closed down under rather dramatic circumstances. The crew was released from their contracts. They tried to hold the cast members to contract. Essentially, I did this by telling the cast members if they left the production or refused to come back at such a point as the production began again, they would never work again. I was paid off. I was on a pay-or-play deal and exited the project at that point in time and was simply forced to go away. In fact, I went out into the rainforest, ended up in a place in the Mary River in near Cape Tribulation, where there was a good fresh water. There were no crocodiles and yams, coconuts, cassava in the trees, good fishing, and I had the payoff from New Line, which was close to 100 grand, and two dingo pups, and no real reason to worry about anything. About 2 months later, I saw a light further down the river, and the next morning I walked downstream to see what the firelight was from, and found that there were some extras from the island of Dr. Moreau camp down there. It was a rest day, and found that one of them was Lewis, the driver guy who had driven Rue back to Sydney and been fired, who had come back and gotten hired again in another department as an extra. And they were playing, it was him and a couple of pig ladies, and they were just on the day off, but had their Stan Winston heads and their prosthetic hands there. And they explained that New Line had managed to reconstitute the production. They'd put John Frankenheimer on board. Shooting had resumed. Apparently what was happening was a complete disaster. The Beast folk urged me to come back to see what had happened in my absence. They said I'd feel much better about the whole thing if I could actually see for myself what was going on. So I took the dog head and the dog hands. I also wanted to see Feruza again, and went back on the set as a dog man. They were not having a good time. Brando had upped his fee by at least 3 times, or everyone was very, very unhappy. Fortunately, I sat through the thing. I saw what was going on. I felt much better about myself because I realized no matter what I'd done, it couldn't have been that bad. And it was good, actually, being back with at least stuck with my cast, leaving them there on their own, considering they were held to contract, considering it was me that talked them into doing it, felt wrong. I have to pray that at some point in the future, somebody does a decent job with the novel, that someone finally adapts that book into something worth watching. A lot of Wells material that would make for fine movies if they were adapted intelligently. But, like Philip K. Dick and a lot of other science fiction writers, his work's fallen prey to the problem that in Hollywood, people tend to make all science fiction movies into action movies. They don't really like science fiction movies that are about characters or ideas, and a lot of the classic sci-fi novels tend to suffer when they go through that process. And again, I deeply apologize for having any part in the desecration of the source material. Hopefully the good doctor will forgive me one day.